You know, I think I've heard just about every way to beat writer's block. I've heard you're supposed to go out for a walk or have something to eat or drink. I've heard you're supposed to take a nap. I've heard you're supposed to do something fun, which is really convenient because you're always worried about getting vague advice when you're struggling to make progress on something. I've heard you're supposed to hang out with friends. I've heard you're supposed to masturbate. I've heard you're supposed to remove all distractions. I've heard you're supposed to read a book or listen to music or make a cup of coffee or read inspiring quotes. But probably the most popular solution that I've heard of from both amateur and professional sources is that the only true way to get around writer's block is to ingest whatever their favorite narcotic is. And the frustrating part about that is that more often than not, this works for the person who's suggesting the idea, but not for anyone else on the damn planet. Because the thing about writer's block is that no two instances are the same. There are tons and tons of reasons as to why you might not be able to touch pen to paper. Like maybe you're just stuck looking at a blank canvas, like there's just too many options and possibilities and you get intimidated. Or maybe you're worried about what everybody's going to think and say about the final result. Or maybe you just can't come up with anything to start with. And because these problems and the people dealing with these problems are all so different, it almost seems like you need an arsenal of techniques in order to get over that feeling of not being creative. But there's actually a way to deal with writer's block that works pretty much all the time. I have yet to see this technique fail, and I haven't seen very many people mention it, so I thought I'd just give you my 2 cents. The definitive solution to writer's block is super easy, and that's the hard part. The trick is, don't be a writer. Writers have to deal with writer's block, so if you don't want to deal with writer's block, then just don't be a writer. I'm not messing with you here, I promise. From now on, instead of being a writer or a composer or an artist or whatever, be an editor. Because it is infinitely easier to edit something than it is to come up with something from scratch. Anyone can tell you how they make a movie or a piece of music better. Anyone can tell you where a TV series went wrong with their favorite character. Because editing is just so damn easier than coming up with an original idea. So the point to this ultimate technique to counter writer's block is just come up with an idea, no matter how shitty. Like literally come up with the worst idea you can possibly come up with. Because the worse your original idea, the better this technique will work. So you take this initial terrible concept and then you make yourself commit to creating something using that terrible idea. Edit it until you get something you like. And if you can't think of anything at all, just come up with something random. Like if you're an actual writer dealing with writer's block, pick 3 random words out of a dictionary and make that the backbone of your new story. And before you get all antsy and start criticizing how bad your preliminary idea is, or before you start getting all nervous about how a project that began with a terrible idea is doomed from the beginning, take a minute and realize that one of the most popular cartoons of recent history involves a kitchen sponge that lives in a pineapple under the sea where one of his best friends is a squirrel from Texas. See, this is a huge problem nowadays. People see the finished result and imagine that someone just waved their hands around until the final product came together, as if every motion just perfectly put each piece in place. The truth is that if you're a professional in any kind of field, if you hand in your first draft of something and call it a day, you aren't going to stay a professional in that field for much longer. There's a pretty big difference between performance and composition. With all the glamour of being on stage, everyone assumes that all art is some sort of performance, but it's just not true. In the music world, if you're writing music on stage, then you're improvising, or as most musicians will call it, soloing. When you're on stage and you're soloing, as soon as the notes come out of your instrument, that's it. There's no editing, there's no second thoughts. That is your finished piece of work. No pressure, right? But when you sit down with a pencil and paper, you can take back all the notes that you would have otherwise played on stage and wouldn't have liked. You can edit them. You can go back to the opportunities that you feel like you might have missed otherwise and refine that project's final result. And for those of you who aren't musicians, just think of it as like a speech is a performance. You can't edit what you say after you've said it. But an essay is something that you compose. You can rewrite any part of it as many times as you want until you're happy with it. So right now, if you're dealing with writer's block, get yourself set up the way you normally would to compose, to write, to draw, whatever your discipline might be. And it doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter how, all that matters is that you get something on the canvas. But make sure it's bad, because that way you can work at it till it's good.